are UK.
Yeah.
Immediately after this one, you're coming.
All right, a lovely afternoon to you, and thanks for joining us on another exciting edition of your weekly program reviewed with UK. And today we are going to discuss the state of Nigeria, the state of the nation. And my guest is someone who is used to being on my side, but now we've dragged him all the way from Nigerian Info 95.1 Abuja to come discuss this issue today. His name is Ofi Ejembi. I hope I pronounced your name well.
Yes, you did.
Thank you so much for coming, Ofi.
Thank you for having me, UK.
All right, before we delve in, what's the full meaning of Ofi, though?
Ofi means joy,
Okay.
and it's the full name, OFI.
And your wife's name is Joy?
My wife's name is Joy.
Okay. It's okay.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you, Ofi, for coming.
Thank you for
Yeah,
having
so much to talk about. I have a friend, she's Mauritanian, and she's in Nigeria. I remember once we were having this meeting, hanging out, and then we asked her what she thought of Nigeria, and she said Nigeria is a nation that has so many issues. 1 week, one issue. 1 week, one issue. And she wondered how we coped as Nigerians, having to keep track of everything. And for someone who works in the media, it must be a nightmare sometimes, right?
Indeed, it is. It seems like every single day there are so many issues to address. Some, and not everything is bad. But I heard someone say once about some other nation, which I will refrain from specifying, that where you have two of them, you have at least three opinions. And I think Nigeria fits exactly into that bill. It's not even just the things that occur. It's also the response of the citizens. Because we're a diverse society, when you look at us ethnically, religiously, and even look at the varied opinions and interests, we're quite a varied crowd. So yes, sometimes it's the issue, sometimes it's the way we react to the issues. And I think, but Nigeria is also a very interesting country.
It's very interesting.
Every time I leave, after a while, I want to come back. Yes, there might be blackouts. Yes, there might be foolish traffic. Yes, there might be issues with utilities and other things. But I think Nigeria is a very interesting country.
Very interesting. I agree with you. But of all the things that have happened in Nigeria so far, since you started keeping track of happenings, both professionally and as a citizen, has there ever been one event that happened and had you really shook, as my American people would say, and they're like, okay, whoa? Because it looks like maybe our reaction as citizens is because nothing shocks us anymore. I mean, we've seen the absurd.
Yes, there have been issues that have shocked me. And I must say that I wasn't always very interested in Nigeria on a, say, professional level or even on a patriotic level. I've always liked my country, but just been concerned about my own personal space and how I fare. I would say that somewhere around 2011, somewhere between 2010 and 2011, and I can't say exactly what happened, but I began to take more than just a cursory look at what was happening within the country. And yes, there have been times where I wonder, did that just really happen? Or is this really the response people are giving to this occurrence? And a couple of them have really, really shocked me. One of the things that has concerned me and was back when under the Jonathan administration, which is touted as having been very pro free speech, was when there was almost a week-long blockade on the distribution of newspapers. Also the prosecution of a newspaper editor and two other staff of one of the national dailies. That was a concern to me. Every single day we hear about corruption issues. It's a concern to me. I don't understand how, first of all, such amounts of money get pilfered, how the laws and processes for prosecution continue to be disregarded, cannot be enforced. It shocks me every single time. So yes, there've been a plethora. I don't think I can look at anyone that ranks higher than the other. Even under this administration, I've seen and heard things and experienced things, and
You're shaking your
I'm
head.
shaking my head. Sometimes I don't even want to talk about them on my show.
It gets depressing, right?
It's I wouldn't use the word depressing. I know that for a lot of people it would. Personally, not depressing. Maybe annoying, maybe even enraging. But sometimes you really wonder what we're doing and whether we're fully aware of where all this is taking us. And sometimes I don't think we get the gravity of the sort of reality we're creating for ourselves. And it's everybody. Those in government, those the citizens, people within Nigeria, the diaspora. I don't think we really fully appreciate what it is we're doing, and that's one of the things I try to do on my platform to get everybody, on all stakeholders of the Nigerian project, to realize, hey,
We're sitting on a time bomb.
we are, we definitely are.
You mentioned, the corruption fight, and the president, Muhammad Buhari. It's become very common to hear people say, "Oh, President Buhari's anti-corruption fight," and he literally won election on that alone. People see him as incorruptible. People see him as someone who will not, launder Nigeria's money. And I remember during the 2015 election campaigns when we saw that picture of him drinking, with a sachet of milk and meal, and a lot of Nigerians were like, "Yes, finally." But I don't know. On a personal note, I haven't been wowed. Have you? I mean, in the way that he's handled corruption, is he really fighting it? Would you say so?
I remember one day getting ready for work really early in the morning. I typically have brain waves very early in the morning. I'm a morning person. And I remember one day I was getting ready for work and this thought just erupted in my head. Integrity is not the same as capacity.
Very key.
Do not confuse integrity for capacity. You might have a mechanic who will not sell you a fake part. He won't steal your fuel, but then he doesn't know how to clean injector nozzles. He's still stuck with carburetors. On the other hand, you might have a person who knows every single thing. With the touch of a finger, the whole car is fixed, but you can't trust a word that parts his mouth. I think this is one of the. I think he aptly describes that illustration.
So you're saying the president has no capacity to lead?
I wouldn't say he doesn't have capacity to lead. I would say that I personally think he's a little. What's the word I want?
Out of touch?
With democratic process.
Given his background.
Given his background and given maybe even his personality, that many times you can fault the processes. You might not be able to fault his intentions, but the process reeks of a disregard or a refusal to engage democratic process. And one of the things that as I think about it more and more, is that as a people, we say we want a democracy, but we don't want to attain it through democratic means. It's just like saying you want to get to Lagos, but you don't want to go south of Abuja. You're in Abuja, you don't want to go south. Well, I have news for you. You will not get to Lagos unless you want to go around the earth over the North Pole and then
find your way
back, or till you hit south and then start coming north again. And I think that is a concern that I have, where yes, the president, like you pointed out, virtually won this election based on his stance against corruption and also his personal integrity. Of course, many others have even faulted that integrity, but for all intents and purposes, you must say that you cannot take that from him, that he's amongst the cleanest leaders we've ever had at a national level.
Okay.
In fact, I might say, with the exception of Yar'Adua, I think he is the cleanest of all who have held positions since 1999. My personal opinion. But what really concerns a lot of people is the process. You say that people are returning loot. Well, where are the convictions?
We don't even know the amount.
Are people returning? Yeah, we don't even know the amount. So how do we know that money? First of all, money actually was returned. If money was returned, secondly, how much? Thirdly, if it was returned and we know how much, what is being done with it? Has it been re-embezzled? All we can take is your word for it, and that's not good enough in governance. That's not good enough in running a business. If you and I have a partnership, I can't tell you, okay, well, yeah, we just made a sale. Where are the records? How much?
But many
Who paid?
many of those who defend the president say his aides who usually say these things. I mean, you never really have him come out and say this is how much. So maybe the blame goes to his aides.
But who appointed the aides? We didn't vote the aides. The mandate does not belong to the aides. The aides are only there because the person we gave the mandate to chose them, and so he has the responsibility to us. In a sense, they don't have a responsibility to us because we didn't give them that mandate. Their responsibility is to the president. The president's responsibility and accountability is to us, the electorate, whether or not he was voted by any person. When he stood on May 29th and swore by the Holy Quran to uphold the Constitution of Nigeria, that Constitution derives its power from all 180 million Nigerians. In fact, it draws its power from all Nigerians who've existed since 1999 and will continue to exist until that constitution is amended. So that doesn't cut it. We heard that in the Jonathan administration. We heard that with Obasanjo. It's not them; they're okay. It's the people around them. Well, guess what? You picked them. You had faith in them. You swore to us that this was your mandate. You took a vow to uphold the Constitution. So do right by it. And if at any time these people are faulting, they're defaulting in their responsibilities, then the onus is on you to fire them or sanction them. So a lot of things that we're hearing about the anti-corruption fight really just don't sit well. In fact, they reek of corruption themselves. And you cannot, just like I said, you can't say that you're gunning for a democracy and don't do that through democratic means. You can't fight corruption through corrupt means too. And corruption doesn't mean that you're embezzling money. It just means that the entire process by which we're trying to gain and achieve an anti-corrupt, corrupt-free society is not proper. It's not going by the books. So if people are returning money, it must be that there's a conviction. Even if there's a plea bargain, they go before a judge. There's an agreement reached between the prosecution and the defense. There's an agreement. Okay, for cooperating with us, we'll give you a suspended sentence or a lighter sentence. But it goes before a judge.
There should be paid. There should be reward for bad behavior.
Yes, there was. But right now we're faced with a situation where certain politically exposed persons want to be preserved, because once you have a conviction, you can't run for political office, and so there's a no-brainer. Nobody has said it, but hey, it's as glaring as night and day, glaring as day. So that really is a concern that I have. Also, a lot of arrests that were made just don't look to be in good faith, or seem to be an abuse of the entire process.
Examples?
The judges. I mean, you had if you had issues with judges, go through the NJC, the Judicial Commission. Let them deal with the judges. You can't continue to have a situation where the executive is like, yes, there are three arms, equal arms of government, but one seems to be more equal than the others.
Ofi, my concern sometimes is that when ordinary citizens like you and I are manhandled and arrested in the dead of night by the police, nobody says let them go through the NJC or let them go through. Why do we have to start talking due process? I'm not anti-due process, but it looks like when it's the elite, when it's the the big boys and the big ladies of the society, we start talking due process.
For people like me, I talk due process regardless. On my show several times I've raised issues and berated the police on how they've handled other arrests. You see, I don't think we even really want democracy. And I heard this touted once by a person, and the more I think about it, I think it's really true. We're a society that lynches robbery suspects. They're just suspects. In the United States, Dylan Roof shot 9 people in cold blood, was bragging about it, and yet he was protected by the state because he did not lose his right as a human being. He lost his right to maybe freedom and movement, but not his inalienable rights as a human being. We don't care about those rights, and so we say, oh, okay, so Ukay is accused or is suspected of shoplifting, and so we feel that any process that can just prove that, regardless of what our laws say and our criminal justice system is justified. It's the same thinking that says, look, judges are accused of whatever, and you can just go about reeling them in. How many of them have been convicted as we speak? And that's what keeps punching holes in the corruption fight. How many convictions have we gotten in 2 years? And every time you talk like this, they say, well, it's the fault of the judges, it's the fault of the criminal justice system. Granted, we have a criminal justice system that is fraught with corruption, irregularities, inefficiency, and mediocrity. We do. But also, the process that ensures or helps and props up that criminal justice system is also fraught with corruption, mediocrity, and ineffectiveness. Every time you have the executive pointing fingers, it's the proverbial forward pointing back.
And sometimes one of the things people say in defense of the fact that we haven't had a lot of convictions is that those who loot money spend a lot of money. They loot so much that they have a lot to prosecute their cases or defend themselves. Case in point, the Saraki trial. I followed that trial, and I remember Saraki had over 80 lawyers on his payroll, and I think about 10, 20, if I'm not mistaken, were senior advocates of Nigeria. They don't come cheap. So maybe there is sense in what people say that sometimes it's not the fault of the federal government. Don't just have as much resources as they have the EFCC, for instance, to prosecute people. When somebody steals over 1 billion or 1 trillion, the person can afford to dedicate 100 million to one case. Whereas probably that 100 million could be the entire budget of the EFCC. So how do we get out of that quagmire?
It's not just one solution, it's a plethora of solutions. But what props everything up is to realize that nobody has more resources than the federal government. Nobody has more power, nobody has more resources. So when the federal government, through its agencies, wants to sell that image of a defenseless, hapless, little Red Riding Hood that's scared of the big bad wolf, I don't buy it. Because when we see other situations and circumstances where the federal government is really interested in showing how much resources and power it has, as we have seen in the southeast, it does so without at the drop of a hat. I don't know who has stolen more money, so much money that has more money than the federal government. I fail to see that. And even if it does, from a purely business point of view, why don't you commit as much resources as you need to get back the money and put it back into the system so the federal government recoups what it lost? So we don't see that commitment. And even though it's a phrase that usually makes me just roll my eyes, the federal government lacks political will to go after corrupt and politically exposed persons and people accused of corruption, and you just have to wonder why. You really just have to wonder. But then again, it's almost like, as people have said, there's no northerner, southerner, Muslim, Christian. You just have rich and poor.
Exactly.
And the rich will continue to protect themselves.
That's the way it is. So I think we should just quickly move on from this. The president he is still in New York attending the United Nations General Assembly, and yesterday he delivered his address. What did you make of it?
I wasn't impressed. You saw the Prime Minister of Israel talk about Israel. You saw other CEOs of countries talk about their entities. Even though, yes, there was passing mention about Nigeria, it didn't sell Nigeria. The primary things he even spoke about Nigeria was just to appreciate the United Nations and the Security Council for helping weak, old, threatened Nigeria from insurgency and terrorists, and even appealed for more help. Talked about North Korea, talked about Myanmar, talked about Palestine. You are not there for Palestine. You are not there for North Korea. You are not invited because you are abreast with the issues in Myanmar. You were not invited on that basis. You are invited as the president, chief executive of Nigeria. I would have expected that there would have been more of a push. Of course, one of the key agendas that the presidency has at the General Assembly is to appeal to world powers and other nations to help repatriate stolen proceeds of crime that are domiciled in those countries. I would say that's the only shining light. But I wasn't impressed.
You think it was hypocritical of the government to of the president to talk about respecting Palestine's right to self-government and self-determination, and also talking about having Myanmar, the president of Myanmar, or the leaders of Myanmar, do all they can to stop the killings of the Rohingya Muslims, and then you come back home in Nigeria, and you look at what's happening in the southeast, IPOB getting shut down because they are asking for self-determination, and the president hasn't spoken about the killings of of Nigerians by Fulani headsmen. I think that was hypocritical.
Indeed, it was. This does not mean that, and this is how I think the average Nigerian just thinks in binary numbers. It's either 1 or 0. And so when a person says, well, the government hasn't handled the agitations for self-determination well, it means you are in support of IPOB. I think IPOB has dug themselves into a hole. IPOB has given people a rope with which to hang it because a lot of his activities have been illegal. Terrorism, no. Illegal, yes. You cannot call for people to take arms against the state. You cannot talk about killing other citizens. You cannot make such inflammatory comments. You cannot insult a president. You cannot insult an entire nation and think that you are winning any sympathy for your cause. So I think it's important to make that clarification. However, yes, it's you get a little dizzy from wondering how back home the president is mute about rampaging herdsmen slaughtering thousands of Nigerians, not foreigners. That would have been bad in itself. But when you have people, and if you buy the narrative that came from the Kaduna State Governor, Malum El-Rufai, some of these people are foreigners themselves, and people cross our territorial boundaries, an external threat, and pillage, kill, vandalize the Nigerian space and people. And the president there was deafening silence from the president. At some point, one of his media aides said we should know the president's style by now. I felt that was extremely in bad taste, extremely insulting to the sensibilities of Nigerians to say it's his style. Your style does not take precedence over your responsibility. And so you have a situation where you would see, I know of parents who would say, well, I really wouldn't spank my kids. Left to me, I wouldn't spank my kids, but I have to because I know what I'm trying to deal with. I need to discipline them. But then the president goes to the United Nations and is calling for, did Myanmar, did the Rohingyas ever ask for help from Nigeria? It's not as if we had emissaries from Rohingya reach out to the Nigerian government and say help. No, that never did happen. So I'm wondering where the nexus, where the point of convergence is.
Big brother Africa. I mean, Nigeria is Africa's big brother.
Yeah, that's our problem. We're big brother. We supply power to neighboring countries and can't provide for our own nationals. And this is a problem we have, and it's not just with government, but as a people, as a culture. We're more interested in a reputation than in character.
That's a deep one.
I want people to think, so a lady gets pregnant and a young lady gets pregnant, father is not concerned about how her life will be altered. He's concerned about his name. Well, Olga, you should have been concerned about your name maybe 15 years before. You should have spent more time with this girl. You should have shown her that you love her unconditionally. Maybe she wouldn't have gone to look for love somewhere else. And that's what we do as a people, and that's what this administration is doing. As well, even previous administrations, where we're so concerned about our reputation as the giant of Africa, but back home we're as puny as dwarves. I fail to get it. And so I really am not impressed with the president's speech. I would hope that, of course, other um, meetings and deliberations will transpire while he's there. And I'm hoping that the only bright light I can see is let's get some traction about getting that money back home. But then again, we're not meeting the World Bank standards for the repatriation of funds. Sometime last year, certain officials at the Swiss embassy opened up certain documents and processes, and I was able to see that even from the last administration, the Abacha loot, the tranche that is up for repatriation, over $700 million, we haven't met the conditions for getting it back. Of course,
What are some of those conditions?
some of the conditions you need to specify what is coming back to do.
Okay.
Now, of course, many people will criticize
I mean, should it
that.
matter? It's our money.
Yeah, but it is not just in Nigeria. Those conditions don't apply just to Nigeria, and these are some of the things that I would have expected you would have raised at the United Nations General Assembly. That pressure should be put on other bodies to make sure that the sovereignty of certain nations is respected. Not talking about Myanmar. As sorry as that situation is, it is not Nigeria's concern as of yet. It isn't. We should be more concerned about $700 million. That's just one.
But Ofi, we criticize Donald Trump for having such similar views, for wanting to make it America first. And we say no, he shouldn't do that. It's not. I mean, the US is the US, so don't. We think it's selfish of him, and then you are asking that President Buhari.
I don't think it's selfish for Trump to say America first.
Okay.
Before you can save someone from drowning, you must make sure you can swim yourself. A person who can't swim sees a person drowning in a pool, all he can do is scream for help. Maybe there's no help around. Nigeria is trying to help other countries from drowning, and we can't even swim ourselves. We're operating a budget that is in perennial deficit. We don't know where we're going to make money to even pay off the interest of loans that we are still taking, externally and domestically. These are issues. That is more of an issue than what is happening in Palestine, in North Korea, or even in Myanmar. So I would have expected the president to address that. That was a platform to address some of those issues and state Nigeria's position that we will not continue to take some of these conditions that are being rammed down ours and other countries' throats. When the money was leaving Nigeria, there was no condition. The money was in the foreign countries illegally. There was no condition. How come we have to satisfy those conditions to get the money back? But then again, how come we're not committing to the processes? And this started under the last administration with the AGF Adoke not fulfilling a lot of conditions and not even showing any form of seriousness to get that money back, at least as far as the conditions and the provisions of the World Bank were. We're seeing the continuation of that. 2 years down the line, we're not any closer in getting that tranche of money, the Abacha loot, and several others back. So I'm concerned about us trying to posture and sell a reputation when underneath there's nothing to write to yourself about, to talk less of writing home.
Should President Buhari fire his media team? Because we know presidents don't write their speeches. They are too busy, dealing with other matters. As well spoken as President Obama is, he does not write his speech.
But he will critique it.
Okay, so
he'll send it back.
So
I don't like this. Take this out.
Should President Buhari fire his team? Because that was, in my opinion, I agree with you, that was a mess of a speech. I know I
don't know about fire, but I think at the very least, he needs to call for them to sit up. This is the president's, which speech was it again that was copied?
He plagiarized. I think that was also President Obama's speech of 2008, if I'm not mistaken.
Even the famous phrase, I belong to everybody and nobody is not original. And that's okay, as long as you acknowledge where you're getting that. When you pass it off as yours, then there's a problem. I would this is the same media team that didn't know what to say when the president was in London. Said there was nothing wrong with him. The president is okay. When the president comes back, he says he's never been this sick in his life. Clearly a lie that was sold from his media team. Nobody got fired. The aide will only do what his master bids or allows. So the president, I think the president needs to. I wouldn't say more serious, but needs to know exactly what he demands from his media.
You think the president is struggling as a Democrat now? He's been a military guy all of his life, former military head of state, and now he's used to issuing orders. He's used to giving directives and saying no, we'll do this. But now he's got to structure his messaging in such a way that it looks like he's catering to everybody. You think that's the struggle that he's faced with?
I would think so. Even though he says he's learning to obey orders from doctors now. Yes, I would think so. And I think it's not just the president, it's the entire bevy of people around him. And not just the people around him, but even the entire nation. We're still not a democratic society. Democracy is not just a system of government. It's a way of life. We are not a democratic people. How many parents discuss with children the direction of a family? How many husbands discuss the inner workings of how much they earn and what they spend on with wives? How many teachers or even school administrators will want to genuinely find out from students how they are to learn? We're not a democratic society. Let's not kid ourselves. We are very militarized. We are extremely sentimental. We are extremely rigid. We don't honor accountability. We think nothing of transparency. And so it's going to take a time, and that's why I believe we deserve our leaders. Our leaders are merely a representation of who we are. The moment we are willing to change ourselves, and that change takes place over a considerable amount of time, over an expanse of from north to south, then we'll see change in leadership. Until then, we won't.
Should we start looking for another system of government that will?
I don't think so.
I mean, who says democracy is the these things were given to us by, I mean, we borrowed that from the West, so to speak, but we've got countries in the world that are doing so well that are not exactly democratic nations in the true sense of it. They don't have elections the way that have every 4 years or every 5 years, depending on what your constitution says. But those countries work well. So should we start devising something that actually works for us, given who we are as a people, and putting that into consideration?
I think it depends on what's your operational definition of doing well. That's an extremely subjective term. You look at a country like Rwanda, which is making giant strides in internet penetration, in off-grid solutions, in education.
And women participation.
Women participation. I mean, it has more than 50% female participation in their parliament, but has extreme cases of human rights abuse.
Don't we have in Nigeria?
Yes, we do.
With all of our democracy?
Yes, we do. So it's you have to ask yourself, like I said, what's the operational definition of doing well? We haven't even defined for ourselves what it is we want.
Exactly.
And so if we know where we're headed as a nation, not as fiefdoms, regions, and enclaves, once we're able to define that, and that's been the biggest failing of presidents and leaders in this country. Personally, I cringe every time I hear we'll build roads, we'll do this, we'll do that, when no one has been able to articulate where they're taking us as a nation. Obasanjo didn't do that. Yar'Adua didn't do that. Jonathan didn't do that. Buhari has not done that. You have to ask yourself, the next president, whenever he comes again, is he going to do that? You see, it's that shared sense of identity, a shared sense of history, of a destination and how to get there, that will make people build their nation. We have so many resources. We have, thankfully, a lack of natural disasters, or at least major natural disasters.
We have man-made ones.
Yes, we have man to compensate for the lack of natural disasters, and yet we seem not to make any progress. Why? Because our number one resource, the people, are headed in 180 million different directions. And two people cannot work together unless they're agreed.
That brings me to my next question. Is Nigeria's unity negotiable?
It is.
We've had all our leaders who swear to their dying days that Nigeria's unity is not negotiable.
There are certain things leaders can't say. There are certain things the president shouldn't do. In fact, shouldn't even know about. People who manage a president or any leader, there are certain things you don't bother to tell your CEO. He doesn't need to know.
Okay.
You should handle it. That's why you're there. However, when you hear people talk about Nigeria's unity, um, it concerns me, because you say the unity is not negotiable, and yet the necessary steps to ensure that it's not even, nobody wants to debate it, you're not carrying out. People, the average Nigerian wants to stay a Nigerian. As much as we might yelp and cry about things happening in our country, the average Nigerian has a very strong sense of patriotism. It might not be expressed as that, but that resilience, that pliability that keeps us going, is actually patriotism and nationalism being voiced in a different manner. Other countries, I mean, would go through less than half of what we have, and they'll definitely be on their way. We saw what happened in Rwanda. We saw what happened in South Sudan. Even Yugoslavia, who you might say now, Oyibo people, they were not immune from it. Everybody split and went their way. Unity is negotiable. And if people, if even in development work, the buzzword now is participation. You cannot have sustainability if there's no participation. You cannot sit down in Geneva or in Abuja and tell people, well, this is the intervention we're going to make. The people for whom you're going to make those interventions must be at the table to determine what they want. So how is it that we're espousing unity? And that's good and fine. But the necessary action to ensure that that unity persists and is enjoyed by all and sundry is not happening. And so what I hear is uniformity. And unity is not uniformity. Ask any Ashwebi wearing group of people who went to the wedding and ended up fighting about rice. Just because they looked the same, sounded the same, didn't mean they were one. And that's our situation in Nigeria. We're wearing Ashwebi, the same Ashwebi, but nobody knows why we're there. And we're fighting over the resources. We're fighting over everything. We must get to the point where, yes, the whole restructuring debate, it needs to be taken seriously.
What does restructuring mean to you?
It means just to make sure the structure works. And so a lot of things that you hear people screaming about restructuring, half the time they don't even, I'm not sure they even know what they're talking about. I would first of all wonder why we just can't make sure that things work the way they should. We have a constitution. We have a national assembly. Why call for a national confab when you have a national assembly? We spent excess of 7 billion officially in the last administration, and the administration didn't even do anything with that report. So that was excess of 7 billion that we just flushed down the toilet because we refused to engage with the proper structure of the National Assembly, which is 100% representative.
But most people don't trust the National Assembly.
Why?
We saw what they did with the constitution review process. They threw out, for instance, the key component of the restructuring debate, which is devolution of powers.
Yes.
And the National Assembly threw it down. So maybe most Nigerians do not have faith in their legislators. And we have done a poll here in Amplified Radio, and over 60% of the people said they do not trust their representatives. So maybe going through the National Assembly, might not be the issue. It's actually implementing, and most people seem to think that implementing the recommendations, or some recommendations, because I don't agree with all of it, I don't agree that Nigeria needs more states, for instance. So implementing parts of that, of the confab could solve this whole restructuring problem.
The thing is, UK, if you have a business and you have 5 staff and you don't trust any of them, what do? Do you continue? This is your money. It's your idea. It's your fulfillment. It's your baby. Do you continue to keep them on? No. You fire some of them. We have representatives. They are not representing us, and yet we continue to wonder why they aren't when we refuse to engage them. Not too young to run. I know that you and a couple of other people around me were involved in that process. Did you guys sit down, twiddle your thumbs, suck your thumbs, and say, well, it was not in the final report forwarded to the National Assembly? Did you?
No.
You went to the National Assembly. I remember there have been times where I've talked about different open hearings at the National Assembly. Eventually go there, just a handful of people. and yet we prefer to scream on Twitter and rave on radio, and will not engage with the institutions. See, there is no group of people who have improved their institutions by standing aloof of them. You must engage the institutions. If you have a problem with the police, you must engage with them. You have a problem with the National Assembly, you must engage with them. You have a problem with the executive, you must engage with it. You have a problem with INEC, you must engage with them. But Nigerians, we have this tendency to withdraw, sit down aloof at some point and wonder why it's not working. You have to work the system for it to work. The system does not exist as some nebulous construct that's devoid of the people. It's the people within a system that will prop it up. And so if we continue to, and this is one of the reasons, the more I think about it, and this is one of the things, the catchphrases I use a lot on my show. If we want the dividends of democracy, we must take on the responsibilities of democracy. Democracy is not let them do it. It is we will do it. Yes, there are some people that we will ask to represent us, but everybody must be involved. I mean, even the basic definition of democracy, government of, for, and by the people. Not the politicians, not the political parties, not the political elite, the people. So if the people are not involved, it morphs into something else. And that's what we have. It's not quite a democracy, it's not quite a monarchy, it's not quite an oligarchy, it's not quite a military junta. It's just a jollof of everything that we've been through over the last 100 and years. That is just an amalgamation of all the political structures that we've had at some point. And so we must engage. We must engage with the National Assembly. If there's any one place that we must look for quick wins, it's the National Assembly. We must. That's our confab. Who's your representative in the Senate? Who's your representative in the lower house? Engage with them. You and your people. Those of you that feel the bite of the irresponsible leadership we have. How can senators say that they won't say how much they're paid? And Nigerians are okay with that?
Nigerians don't.
We just say okay,
problem.
say, well, there is God. And then we laugh about it or we just rave about it. But there's no action. There's no action. It's the same thing with government. Government says, unity, but no action. We say we want transparency, no action. Where people who are, we're suffering under some form of political inertia, where we don't want to go backwards, but we're not making any steps to go forward. And so we remain where we are. So if we want to see things change, the restructuring is to make sure the structure that we have as is works. As we're moving along, then we see the specific areas that have to change. For example, one of the major places I would even say that needs restructuring is our electoral system. That's what we need to get everything sorted out. That will help with fiscal restructuring, it will help with political restructuring, it will help with the regional imbalances. And there's no one region that is not suffering from some level of marginalization. Some more than others, of course, but every region has fundamental issues that need to be addressed.
So I've asked like two people this question. I'm going to ask you, which do we need more urgently? Political restructuring or economic restructuring?
Both.
Working at the same time?
Yeah, at the same time. But of course, politicians make economic decisions. It's not economists that make political decisions. They create political realities, but the decisions are made by politicians. And unfortunately, we have, for decades, brought people to make economic decisions as politicians. They don't know jack. They don't know jack about economics. Or they willfully make some of the daftest decisions when it comes to the economy. Why we have monetary and fiscal policy that are running counter to one another, I really don't know. But that's what we've been doing for years.
Okay.
We don't have any stream of revenue, but we're borrowing to the hilt. We're not putting what we're borrowing into anything tangible that's supposed to accrue some of it. Just think of it. I mean, you don't borrow money to buy shoes. If you're borrowing to start a business. But I don't know how it is politicians get into the place of governance and they throw common sense out the window. And that's what we've been doing for years, and we wonder why the economy is in such tatters. It's not a Jonathan fault alone. It's not a Buhari fault alone. They did this, the Jonathan and Buhari administration came together, knowingly or unknowingly, to create the economic realities we have by very horrible political decisions that were made concerning the economy. And so We have to restructure both. But yes, if I'm going to lean towards any, I'd say politically.
Okay, because you need the
Because the
political
politicians,
decision to make those.
because that top
economic ones.
10% gobble more than 80% of our budget.
Cool. Okay, so back to IPOP. We're almost rounding up. Back to IPOP now. Last week we woke up to the news that the Southeast governors had banned IPOP activities, and then the military proscribed IPOP and called them terrorist group, and Nigerians went up. I remember social media was agog. Everybody was talking, some in support, some criticizing that move. And then a few days went by, and just on Monday the Senate President came up to say that wasn't the right move, that we didn't follow constitutional route. First and foremost, what did you make of that? Personally, I was suspicious, like Saraki. Okay, 3 days went by and you had to make that. I was thinking this has some undertones of 2019 politicking coming up. What did you think?
Well, I'm not one for conspiracy theories. I simply try to deal with issues as are. I'm 100% behind the Senate President on this one. I'm also 100% behind the fact that she has a case to answer at the tribunal, regardless of what transpired there. I believe the Senate President, for all intents and purposes, is getting away with too much, as other politicians in our space. However, I'm 100% behind him because that is what the Constitution says. I'm not looking at what Saraki, the president, said. I'm looking at a Senate President that is speaking what the Constitution says. You cannot proscribe any group of people. It's not the place of the military. Just like it's not the place of the police to determine fiscal policy. Does the IG of police determine how much the naira is going to exchange for the dollar? He doesn't do that. He has no business with it. The same thing with the military. The military doesn't make decisions. They receive directives from the commander-in-chief. And so once again, something I said before, where we have an administration that keeps bungling almost every single decision, after the military proscribes, then they now run back to the Constitution and say, okay, what does the Constitution say? And then finally on Sunday, the president finally directs the Attorney General to actually make the pronouncement for prescription. Finally, they get it right. And that's what the Senate President was saying. Now, once again, and this was one of the issues I raised on my show, how is it that the Senate President, number 3 man in the country, doesn't know about such a pronouncement on Monday, when the President, according to his aides and a statement from the presidency, wrote that letter on Sunday?
Could that be because of the sort of power tussle, I don't know if you may call it, that has been going on between the legislature and the executive since inception of this administration?
You can have your power tussle, no problem. McCain is not one of Trump's biggest fans, but he went ahead to vote and do what constitutionally is his duty on the recent health bill. Until we get to this point, look, I don't have to like you. You don't have to like me. There's nowhere in the Constitution says we have to hold hands and peck each other on the cheek every single time we sit down to do our duties. I don't have to like the pilot that flies me from Abuja to Lagos, but he just needs to do his job and I need to pay my fare. President, do your job. Senate President, do yours. Where there's supposed to be a nexus, make sure it's done. And this is where I fault lots of the citizens. We tend to band around, oh, I'm for the president, I'm for the Senate. Look, you're for Nigeria. If the activities of the president are anti-Nigeria, let him know. You guys can be blood brothers, but let him know that, Oga, you're not doing right by Nigeria. None of us were here in 1914 when Nigeria was formed. If the world endures to 2024, many of us will not be here, but Nigeria will endure. Where's SDP? Where's NRC? Where's UNPP? Where's NCNC? All those came and left. Nigeria endures. And yet you have people picking sides. It doesn't matter if you are blaming whose blame it was that the Titanic was sinking. The Titanic sunk. And everybody on board died. We can't seem to see that Nigeria is sinking. And that's why I said at the very beginning, I don't think we get what is happening here. I remember back in the 80s and 90s, how my parents griped. I said, man, back in the 60s and early 70s, Nigeria wasn't like this. They yearned for the 60s and 70s in the 80s and 90s. Now, I'm wondering if I could have what my parents were complaining about in the 80s and 90s. I would give a lot to have that now in the 2000s. We continue this way, come 2020 what and 2030 something, we'll be yearning for the 2000s and 2017. We don't seem to get that our country is sinking. Not because of the devil, not because of imperialistic decisions, not because of one political party or one region, but that all of us are refusing to choose Nigeria above every other thing. And so it doesn't matter what you think about the Senate president. What he said, is he making his position based on the Constitution? Yes. The executive bungled it. The military went above board. And so it's wrong.
But they've come back to take back what they said and said no, they didn't say that, even though we all watched it on TV.
That just shows you the sort of people we're dealing with. It brings to mind the lack of integrity. The president isn't sick. President comes back and says, I've never been this sick in my life. And nobody has a problem with it. The military says they actually went out to say they're a terrorist group. IPOB is a terrorist group. You come back and recant and say we didn't say that. Hello. We weren't born yesterday. Neither are we therefore hallucinating. You did say it. Say, okay, well, we got it wrong and maybe we didn't go through the proper process and we take that back and we yield to the executive. That's better than saying you didn't say it. And so the whole situation in the Southeast, I think everybody, starting off from the IPOB agitators themselves, and I think I spoke about this a little earlier, I cannot figure for the life of me how people in the Southeast only want to hold the federal government accountable and not their state governors. Have you heard anything from senators from the 5 eastern states? Okay. House of Representatives? Have they made any position, even in the last 2 years, to address some of the fundamental issues that cause for agitation and the call for self-determination? No.
One of the issues was southeastern. I'm from the southeast. I'm from Abia, where the whole Python dance is going on. Is the fact that there's little or no federal presence. But I remember during the Jonathan administration, the Minister for Works was from Abia State, and the front of his house was not motorable.
It's the same thing as the South shouting about for resource control, and yet with all the Ministry of the Niger Delta, NDDC, Derivation Fund, and the other perks that come from the IOCs, you don't hear people in the South asking these bodies and these characters. It's always the federal government, and that's where you see that it's either we don't understand what the issues are, or we're just not sincere. We're just using it to scuttle an administration.
Or maybe because everything rises and falls on leadership.
Yes, it does. But leadership is not just at the federal level. You have leadership at state level. You have leadership as elected representatives. And I'm not saying that the presidency or the federal level doesn't have questions to answer. It does. A lot of them. And some of them are constitutional that must be addressed from the Constitution. So there's that. But then you can't tell me that you only hold the federal government accountable and state governors have a free ride. It doesn't make sense. It was interesting to see the position of the state governors. Suddenly, they caught a brainwave and decided that it was now time to address this situation. For 2 years, you let Kanu spew hate. For 2 years, you let some of the activities of the IPOB agitators to continue to go unfettered. You said nothing. Not wanting to squander your political capital in society. Suddenly, when the federal government wants to take certain decisions, you suddenly are now very Catholic as the Pope. It just shows you that a lot of people in leadership are not there for the right reasons.
And they don't have people in mind. But Ofi, we're out of time. I think the last question I'm going to ask you is, maybe if you can do justice to this in a minute or two, how do we realistically fix Nigeria? I mean, a lot of young people particularly are out of ideas. Most people want to run away. Most people can't see any future for themselves here. And you can't blame them. Nigeria is a depressing place to be in right now, because each day you wake up in the morning, put on the TV, go to social media, read the papers, and there is nothing to give you hope for you to think that, okay, something is going to change. Is there hope, and how do we get out of here?
There's lots of hope. Nigeria's situation is far better than apartheid South Africa. You couldn't even vote in your own country. You couldn't own certain levels of property in your own country. So we're far better than apartheid South Africa, yet they found a way. We're much better than the pre-segregation United States when Martin Luther King stood up. You had to sit at the back of the bus. Imagine, as certain people in your own country, you have to sit at the back of your bus. You can't use certain toilets. You can't drink from certain faucets. So this narrative that we say is so hopeless, forget that. It's nonsense. It's gibberish at best. The problem is, and I go back to what I said before, we want democracy. Let us take on the responsibilities. You see a lot of people making agitations, but it's with ulterior motive. Not choosing Nigeria. It's not propelled by any sense of integrity. The Nigerian citizen, and most of the time I put the blame and responsibility on the citizens. Leaders all across the world are not saints. They make decisions because they know they will be held accountable. Or they make certain decisions because nobody's going to do nothing about it. And so until citizens, Nigerian citizens, stand up, until a Hausa man can look Buhari in the eye and say, sir, that decision was wrong. And he sees a groundswell of Northerners telling him that your decisions, your policies, your comportment is wrong and detrimental to this nation, and we're going to hold you accountable. Until we get to that point where people are not, from the creeks, are not celebrating Alamesia when he comes back. I was in a function the other day, and as soon as Ibori walked in, people were hailing and screaming and clapping and jubilating. And I'm like, this is an ex-convict. He was in jail in the United Kingdom for pilfering your own money, not their own money.
Stockholm's syndrome?
Yeah, in Stockholm, I think we're just in love with our captors. So until we get to the point where Bode George doesn't come back from prison and people are sowing Ashwebi and welcome him and jubilating, if you notice, I've made sure I've touched almost every region as much as possible. It's the malady is everywhere. It's in north, it's in south, it's east, it's west, it's Christian, it's Muslim, it's male, it's female. What else? It's all the regions. And until we wake up and realize that, look, the guy in far north, what he wants is a society that works, right? The guy down south in the creeks, he wants a society that works. The only way for us in a democracy to make sure it works is to make sure that people who get into political office are held accountable. It's as simple as that. But we try to, oh no, it's about restructuring, it's about resource control, it's about
cessation.
And then we begin to muddle up the waters.
Marginalization.
And everybody begins to run off in different directions, when it really is simple. You must be transparent, if not, get out. And this narrative that, give him, I heard this under the Jonathan administration, he give him his 8 years. Nobody has 8 years. You're not even guaranteed 4. Melai now is going through a process of recall. I would love to see a day when when more governors are impeached, when a president is impeached. Look at Kenya. No disrespect to Kenya, but I mean, you juxtapose Kenya against Nigeria, you wonder why in Nigeria we just can't get something basic right.
Ofi, you've thrown up a lot for us to ponder on and to chew on, as we say, a lot actually. But my takeaway here is, if we want the dividends of democracy, we've got to work for it. So nobody's going to give you anything. You've got to get what you want. Thank you so much, Ofi, for coming on. It's really been an enlightening time with you, and really you've done justice to discussing the state of the nation.
Thank you very much, Ukay. I really did appreciate it, and I think you're doing a fabulous job.
Blushing. Alright guys, this is where we come to the end of Reviewed with Ukay this Wednesday, the 20th day of September 2017. Thank you so much for keeping a date with us, and I will see you next week, same time, same station. Bye for now. Ofi.
Whoa.